The wine glass trembled in my hand as my mother's words cut through the warm October air like shattered glass. 28 years old, and I still felt like that scared little girl hiding behind the couch when the yelling started. The family dinner had been going well until Aunt Margaret asked about my prospects, that loaded word that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. Your sister already has a house, a car, and a husband. And you, when are you going to be someone in life? Mom's voice carried across our cramped dining room, dripping with the kind of disappointment that had shaped my entire existence. The laughter that followed felt like needles under my skin. Dad's nervous chuckle, Sarah's triumphant giggle, Uncle Tom's booming guffaw that shook his considerable belly. I stared at the half-eaten slice of birthday cake before me, Sarah's birthday cake naturally. Even at 25, my younger sister commanded center stage with the effortless grace of someone who had never known failure. Her engagement ring caught the light, a 2-carat diamond that probably cost more than I made in 6 months at the nonprofit where I worked with homeless veterans. The silence stretched as everyone waited for my response. I could feel their eyes on me, pitying, judgmental, amused. Mom's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the mahogany table that had been Grandma's, the one piece of furniture that survived Dad's drinking years and the subsequent financial ruin. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her blonde hair catching the chandelier light like spun gold, her smile sharp as a blade. Well, Mom pressed, her voice rising with that edge I knew meant trouble. Don't you have anything to say for yourself, Emma? The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with their peeling wallpaper and family photos that told the story of our dysfunction in carefully curated smiles. I set down my wine glass with deliberate care, my hands steadier than I felt inside. The familiar burn of shame rose in my throat, but something else rose with it, something cold and final. I need to get something from my car, I said quietly, pushing back from the table. The chair legs scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on glass. Oh, running away again. Sarah's voice was honey-sweet with malice, just like high school. I paused at the doorway, my hand on the frame where Dad had marked our heights as children. Sarah's line was higher, always higher, even though she was 3 years younger. My finger traced the faded pencil marks as I turned back to face the table full of people who were supposed to love me. I'll be right back, I said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. Then we can talk about what it really means to be someone in life. The October night air hit my face like a blessing as I stepped onto the porch, my heels clicking against the wooden boards that Dad had never gotten around to fixing. The moon hung full and bright above the suburban street where I'd grown up, where every house held secrets and every family had their golden child and their scapegoat. My hands shook as I opened the trunk of my beat-up Honda Civic, pushing aside the emergency blankets and first aid kit I kept for work. The manila envelope was exactly where I'd left it, sealed and heavy with the weight of truth. I'd been carrying it for 3 months, waiting for the right moment, the courage, the final straw. Tonight was the night. I walked back toward the house, the envelope clutched against my chest like armor. Through the dining room window, I could see them still sitting around the table, probably dissecting my character with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for Mom's pot roast. Sarah was gesturing animatedly, no doubt regaling them with another story of my failures. The front door opened with a creak that announced my return. I made my way back to the dining room, where the conversation died abruptly. 7 pairs of eyes fixed on me, on the envelope in my hands, on the expression I knew must be written across my face. Mom's smile faltered slightly. What's that, honey? I sat down slowly, placing the envelope on the table between the wine glasses and dessert plates. The silence was complete now, heavy with anticipation, and something that might have been fear. This, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years, is what it looks like to be someone in life. The envelope sat on the table like a living thing, commanding attention from every person in the room. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat echoing in my ears like thunder. 28 years of swallowed words, 28 years of being the disappointment, the failure, the one who couldn't get her life together. Emma, what is this dramatic nonsense? Mom's voice carried that familiar note of exasperation, the tone she'd used when I brought home B's instead of A's, when I chose social work over law school, when I dared to exist outside the narrow parameters of her expectations. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood, but had never tried to know my heart. Dad, hunched over his coffee cup, avoiding eye contact as he always did when conflict arose. Aunt Margaret, her Botox-frozen forehead incapable of expressing the curiosity burning in her eyes. Uncle Tom, still chuckling softly, because he assumed this was all part of some elaborate joke. And Sarah, beautiful, perfect Sarah, whose life had unfolded like a fairy tale while mine felt like a cautionary tale told to scare children. She was watching me with the predatory focus of a cat watching a wounded bird, waiting to see if I would finally break completely. "Do you remember?" I began, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "When I dropped out of law school." Mom's mouth tightened. "Emma, we don't need to rehash your failures. Do you remember what you said to me?" I continued, ignoring her interruption. "You said I was throwing away my life, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was embarrassing the family." "Well," Mom huffed, "weren't we right? Look at you now." The cruelty in her voice would have destroyed me once. For years it had. I'd internalized every cutting remark, every disappointed sigh, every comparison to Sarah's mounting achievements. I'd let their words become the voice in my head, the constant whisper that I wasn't enough, would never be enough. "I dropped out," I said, opening the envelope with steady fingers, "because Tommy Hendricks was overdosing in an alley downtown, and I was the only one who found him." The silence shifted, became something heavier. Tommy Hendricks, our neighbor's son, the boy who used to mow our lawn and help Dad with the gutters, the boy who'd come home from Afghanistan with invisible wounds that festered in the darkness. "I was walking back from the library," I continued, pulling out the first document. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Constitutional law final was the next morning. I had studied for weeks. "You remember, Mom, you kept complaining that I never left my room." Sarah's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table, a nervous tell she'd never been able to shake. "Emma, what does this have to do with anything?" I spread the newspaper clipping on the table. The headline read, "Local Veteran Saved by Good Samaritan's Quick Thinking." Below it was a grainy photo of me, looking young and shell-shocked, my eyes hollow with the weight of what I'd witnessed. "He was dying," I said quietly. "Heroin mixed with fentanyl. I'd taken a CPR class in high school, remembered just enough to keep him breathing until the paramedics arrived. 3 minutes later, and he would have been gone." Dad finally looked up, his watery eyes focusing on the newspaper clipping with confusion. "Emma, we never saw this, because I never showed you." I pulled out another document, then another. Because the next morning, instead of taking my constitutional law final, I was in the hospital with Tommy, calling his mother, his sister, his therapist. I was learning about addiction and PTSD, and the fact that 22 veterans commit suicide every single day in this country. The documents spread across the table told a story none of them knew, a story of volunteer work at veteran centers, of crisis intervention training, of sleepless nights spent talking down broken soldiers from ledges both literal and metaphorical. "I failed that final," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Failed the whole semester, actually. Not because I wasn't smart enough, not because I wasn't capable, but because I was busy saving lives while you were busy planning Sarah's engagement party." Mom's face had gone pale. "Emma, we didn't know, because you never asked." The words came out sharper than I intended, 28 years of accumulated hurt bleeding through. "You never asked why I was so tired, why I'd lost weight, why I jumped every time my phone rang. You just assumed I was failing because that's what failures do." I pulled out another document, this one more recent. It was a letter on official letterhead, words like commendation and extraordinary service, and lives saved, jumping off the page like small miracles. "Tommy Hendricks got clean," I said, watching their faces as the truth began to sink in. "He's been sober for 3 years now. He's married, has a daughter named Emma, after me. He's the 3rd veteran I've helped transition to civilian life this year, the 17th in the past 5 years. Sarah leaned forward, finally understanding that this wasn't about her for once. "Emma, I had no idea you were doing this work, because it doesn't pay 6 figures like your marketing job, because it doesn't come with a company car or a corner office or a handsome fiancé who looks good in Christmas card photos." I met her eyes, seeing something shift in their blue depths, because the kind of success I've found doesn't photograph well for Mom's Facebook posts. The room was completely silent now, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street. I could feel the weight of their attention, the gradual dawning comprehension that the narrative they'd constructed about my life was built on assumptions and willful blindness, but I wasn't finished. The envelope still held its most devastating secrets, the truths that would shatter their perfect understanding of who was the success and who was the failure in this family. I reached for the next document, my fingers steady as stone. Sarah's engagement ring caught the light as she shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and for the first time in years, I saw uncertainty flicker across her perfect features. The golden child wasn't used to being upstaged, wasn't accustomed to sitting in anyone's shadow, especially not mine. That's really admirable, Emma," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when she was trying to regain control of a situation. But let's be realistic here. Volunteer work is nice, but it's not exactly a career, is it? I mean, Mom has a point about stability. Volunteer work? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. I pulled out a document that had arrived just last week, still crisp and official. Is that what you think this is? The letterhead belonged to the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the numbers at the bottom made Dad's pension check look like pocket change. Sarah's mouth opened slightly as she processed what she was seeing. My salary, my benefits, my federal employment status as a senior crisis counselor. I make more in a year than you spend on shoes, I said quietly, watching her face drain of color. I've been promoted 3 times in 5 years. I have a government pension, full medical and dental, and job security that doesn't depend on whether some marketing campaign goes viral. Mom snatched the document from Sarah's trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the numbers with the intensity of an accountant. Her perfectly applied lipstick had smudged slightly, creating tiny red cracks in her composure. But you never said, Mom began. You never asked. I was tired of repeating those words, tired of the hurt that came with them. Every conversation we've had for the past 5 years has been about Sarah's achievements, Sarah's wedding plans, Sarah's perfect life. When's the last time anyone at this table asked me how I was doing? Really asked? Uncle Tom cleared his throat uncomfortably. Emma, honey, you have to understand. No, I cut him off with a gentleness that was somehow more final than shouting. I don't have to understand anything anymore, but you're about to understand why I've been carrying this envelope around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to open it. I reached into the envelope again, and this time what I pulled out made Sarah gasp audibly. It was a photograph, professional, glossy, the kind you'd see in a high-end magazine. But the woman in the photo wasn't modeling designer clothes or expensive jewelry. She was unconscious in a hospital bed, her face a map of bruises in various stages of healing. Sarah, I said gently, holding the photograph where everyone could see it. Do you want to tell them? Or should I? The silence that followed was different from all the others, electric with terror and sick with recognition. Sarah's perfect facade cracked like ice in spring, and underneath was something raw and desperate that made my heart ache despite everything. Emma, please, she whispered, and in those 2 words was more honesty than I'd heard from her in years, but I was past the point of protecting her secrets, past the point of letting her maintain the illusion that had cost me so much. I pulled out another document, a police report with Sarah's name at the top, and her fiancé Michael's name listed under suspected perpetrator. 3 months ago, I began, my voice steady despite the way my hands were shaking. I got a call at 2 a.m. My sister was in the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital, and they'd found my business card in her purse, the card I'd given her 2 Christmases ago when she made fun of my job. Dad's coffee cup clattered against the saucer as he set it down too hard. Sarah, is this true? Sarah's beautiful face was crumpling like paper, tears streaming down her cheeks and taking her mascara with them. Emma, you promised? I promised I wouldn't tell them unless you kept letting them use me as the family punching bag. I pulled out more photographs, each one documenting injuries that had been carefully concealed with makeup and designer scarves. I promised I'd keep your secret as long as you got help, as long as you left him. The photographs spread across the table like accusations, bruised ribs, fingerprint marks on delicate wrists, a concussion that had been explained away as a skiing accident, Michael's handiwork, hidden beneath the veneer of their perfect relationship. The house you're so proud of, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. It's in his name only. The car, leased through his company. The credit cards, the bank accounts, the investments, all his. You have nothing, Sarah. Less than nothing, because you owe your soul to a man who uses you as a punching bag when his clients make him angry. Mom was staring at the photographs with growing horror, her hand pressed to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? Because, I answered for her. She was too busy maintaining the illusion that she was the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that the daughter you've been holding up as the golden standard was actually falling apart. Sarah's sobs were ugly now, the kind of crying that came from deep in the chest and couldn't be prettied up or contained. He said if I left him, he'd make sure I had nothing. No job, no references, no way to support myself. He has connections everywhere in the marketing world. I reached across the table and took her hand, ignoring the way she flinched at first. Her fingers were ice cold and trembling like a frightened bird. That's what abusers do, I said softly. They isolate you, control you, make you believe you're helpless without them. It's a textbook case. I see it every day with the veterans I counsel. Trauma doesn't discriminate based on gender or military service. But even as I held my sister's hand, even as I felt the familiar pull of compassion that had defined my career, I wasn't finished with my revelations. The envelope still held its most damning secret, the truth that would reshape everything they thought they knew about success and failure, about who deserved praise and who deserved pity. The truth about why I'd really been carrying this envelope for 3 months. Sarah's hand felt fragile in mine, like bird bones wrapped in silk. Her tears had slowed to a steady stream, but the damage was done. Her perfect mask had cracked beyond repair, revealing the terrified woman beneath. Around the table, my family sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the golden child they'd worshipped with the victim, whose bruises were now spread across our dinner table like evidence in a courtroom. How long? Mom's voice was barely a whisper, and for the first time in my adult life, I heard genuine pain in it, rather than disappointment. 2 years, Sarah managed between shaky breaths. It started small, grabbing my arm too tight when he was angry, pushing me against walls during arguments. I told myself it wasn't really abuse because he never hit my face where it would show. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking us all. Dad had gone completely gray, his hands trembling as he reached for his coffee cup and missed. Uncle Tom was staring at his plate, as if it held the secrets of the universe, while Aunt Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "The engagement ring," I said quietly, nodding toward the diamond that had caught the light so brilliantly just minutes ago. "Tell them about the engagement ring, Sarah." She looked at me with something between gratitude and terror, as if she wanted to confess but couldn't find the words. I squeezed her hand gently, the way I'd learned to do with veterans who were locked in their own private wars. "He gave it to me," she whispered, "after he put me in the hospital the first time. Said it was his way of apologizing, of showing me how much he loved me. The doctor said I had 3 cracked ribs and internal bleeding." Mom made a sound like a wounded animal. "Sarah, baby, why didn't you come home?" "Because," Sarah's voice grew stronger with anger. "Every conversation we had was about how perfect my life was, how lucky I was to have found such a successful man. Do you remember what you said when I tried to tell you we were having problems? You told me that all relationships require compromise, that I needed to stop being so dramatic." The accusation hit its mark. Mom's face crumpled as she remembered her own words, the casual dismissal that had sent her daughter back into the arms of her abuser. "I tried to leave him once," Sarah continued, her voice gaining momentum like a confession. "Last Christmas, remember? I came home for 3 days, said I was taking a break from wedding planning. But you all kept talking about how wonderful he was, how I'd be crazy to let him go. Uncle Tom even gave me a lecture about commitment and not giving up when things get tough." Uncle Tom's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "Sarah, if I'd known—" "But you didn't want to know," I interrupted, my own anger finally breaking free. "None of you wanted to know anything that didn't fit the perfect narrative you'd constructed about our lives. Sarah was the success story, and I was the cautionary tale. It was easier that way, wasn't it? Easier than actually paying attention to what was really happening." I pulled out another document from the envelope, this one with my signature at the bottom. It was a custody evaluation form from the state of Illinois, filled out in my careful handwriting. 3 months ago, I said, when Sarah called me from that hospital bed, she told me something else, something that changes everything about why I've been keeping her secrets. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened to the point of pain, her nails digging into my palm. "Emma, please. She's pregnant," I announced, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. 8 weeks along when Michael put her in the hospital. The doctors weren't sure the baby would survive the internal bleeding. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking, as if time itself was holding its breath. Mom's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with a mixture of joy and horror that was almost too much to witness. "A baby?" Dad's voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah, you're having a baby?" "Was," Sarah corrected, her voice breaking on the single syllable. "I was having a baby. The bleeding. The doctor said it was a miracle I survived. The baby didn't." The weight of that confession settled over the room like a shroud. I watched the faces around the table as they processed what they were hearing. Not just the loss of a grandchild none of them had known existed, but the brutal circumstances that had caused it. "That's not the worst part," I said quietly, pulling out the final document from the envelope. It was a sworn affidavit, notarized and official, with Sarah's signature at the bottom. "Sarah, do you want to tell them or should I?" She was crying again, but these tears were different, cleaner somehow, as if confession was washing away years of accumulated poison. "After I lost the baby, she whispered. Michael told me it was probably for the best, said he wasn't ready to be a father anyway, that I would have been a terrible mother. And then, I prompted gently, and then he raped me. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock across the room. In the hospital bed, while I was still bleeding from the miscarriage, he said it was his right as my fiancé, that I owed him for all the medical bills. Mom's sob was raw and primal, the sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time. Dad pushed back from the table so violently that his chair toppled backward, crashing to the floor with a sound like breaking bones. "I'll kill him," Dad said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'll find him and I'll kill him with my bare hands." "No," I said firmly, holding up the affidavit. "You won't, because Sarah has already filed charges: assault, battery, rape, stalking, and financial abuse. The trial starts next month, and she's going to testify." Sarah looked up at me with wonder in her eyes, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "You helped me fill out the paperwork. You found me the lawyer. You've been coming to therapy sessions with me for 3 months. That's what family does," I said simply. "Real family. Not the performative kind where we pretend everything is perfect and compare each other's achievements like trophies." But I still wasn't finished. The envelope had one more secret, one final revelation that would explain why I'd chosen this moment, this dinner, this public forum for Sarah's confession. The secret that would show them exactly what it meant to be someone in life. The overturned chair lay on its side like a fallen soldier, and Dad made no move to right it. Instead, he stood behind where it had been, his hands clenched into fists that hadn't seen violence since his army days 30 years ago. The man who had spent my childhood hiding behind newspapers and silence was finally, fully present, and he was magnificent in his rage. "Where is he?" Dad's voice was barely controlled, each word precise and deadly. "Where is this piece of garbage right now?" "He doesn't know where Sarah is," I said, pulling out a restraining order with Michael's photo stapled to the corner. "She's been staying at my apartment for the past 3 months. The address he has on file is a P.O. box I set up through work." Sarah squeezed my hand gratefully, and I could feel some of the tension leaving her body. For 3 months, she'd been living in the spare bedroom I'd converted into an office, sleeping on a pull-out couch, and wearing my clothes because she'd left Michael's house with nothing but her purse and the business card I'd given her 2 years ago. "You've been living with Emma?" Mom's voice was small, confused. "But you told us you were renovating the house. That's why we couldn't visit, because I couldn't let you see what he'd done to me," Sarah whispered. I couldn't bear the shame of admitting that perfect Sarah with her perfect life was actually a complete disaster. I reached into the envelope one more time, and what I pulled out made the entire table lean forward with curiosity. It was a thick manila folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents, with Sarah's name written across the front in my careful handwriting. "There's something else," I said, opening the folder to reveal a stack of documents that seemed to glow under the dining room chandelier. "Something I've been working on since the night Sarah called me from the hospital." The first document was a business license, official and embossed with the state seal. The second was incorporation papers for a nonprofit organization. The third was a grant application, approved and funded to the tune of $500,000. "The Sarah Henderson Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors," I read aloud, watching Sarah's face transform with wonder. "Providing emergency housing, legal aid, and career rehabilitation for women escaping abusive relationships." Sarah's mouth fell open. "Emma, what is this?" "Your new job," I said simply. "If you want it. Full salary, benefits, and the chance to use your marketing skills to actually save lives instead of selling overpriced handbags to rich women who don't need them." The documents spread across the table told a story of 3 months of 18-hour days, of grant applications and legal filings, of meetings with city officials and social workers, and judges who understood that the system was broken and wanted to help fix it. "The building is downtown," I continued, pulling out photographs of a renovated warehouse space. 3 floors, crisis counseling on the first floor, temporary housing on the second, job training and placement services on the third. "We can house 12 women and their children at full capacity." Mom was staring at the photographs with something like awe. "Emma, where did you find the money for all this?" I pulled out one final document, a bank statement that made everyone at the table do a double take. The number at the bottom was staggering, 6 figures that represented years of careful saving and strategic investing. "I've been living on $30,000 a year and saving the rest," I said matter-of-factly. "Turns out when you don't spend money on designer clothes and luxury cars and 2-carat engagement rings, you can accumulate quite a nest egg." Sarah was crying again, but these tears were different, clean and bright and full of something that might have been hope. "You did all this for me?" I did it because it needed to be done, I corrected gently. Because every day I go to work and see broken people who've been failed by systems that are supposed to protect them. Because I got tired of treating symptoms instead of causes. I stood up slowly, gathering the documents back into their folders with the methodical precision of someone who had spent months organizing a revolution. The foundation opens in 6 weeks. We already have our first resident, a woman named Maria, whose husband put her in the same emergency room where you spent 3 days recovering from internal bleeding. The silence around the table had changed again, become something expectant and electric. These weren't the same people who had been mocking my failures 15 minutes ago. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that I almost felt sorry for them. Sarah, I said, turning to face my sister directly, you have a choice. You can go back to Michael, try to rebuild the illusion that your life is perfect, continue letting him use you as a punching bag until he finally kills you. Or you can come with me tomorrow morning to see our new building, meet our first residents, and start the real work of becoming someone in life. She didn't hesitate. I'll come with you. And the rest of you, I said, my gaze moving around the table to touch each face in turn, can either keep playing your little games of comparison and judgment, or you can figure out how to be a family that actually supports each other instead of tearing each other down. Mom reached across the table toward me, her perfectly manicured hand trembling slightly. Emma, honey, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. You had every opportunity to have an idea, I interrupted, but not unkindly. You chose not to take it. The question now is what you're going to choose going forward. I tucked the envelope under my arm and stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. The burden of their expectations, their disappointments, their casual cruelty. I was setting it all down right here at this table, leaving it for them to deal with. But as I turned toward the door, Sarah's voice stopped me. Emma, wait. There's something else. Something I need to tell them about Michael. I turned back, and the expression on her face made my blood run cold. In her eyes was a darkness I hadn't seen before, a knowledge that went deeper than abuse and touched something far more sinister. What is it? I asked quietly. He's not just abusive, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's dangerous, and I think I know where he learned to hurt people so effectively. The dining room seemed to shrink around us as Sarah's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I set the envelope back down on the table, every instinct I'd developed through years of crisis counseling suddenly screaming danger. Sarah's face had gone beyond pale. She looked almost translucent, as if the truth she was about to tell might consume her entirely. What do you mean, dangerous? I asked, settling back into my chair with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild animal. Sarah's hands were shaking so violently she had to clasp them together to keep them still. The first time he hurt me, I thought it was just anger, you know? Like he'd lost control for a moment. But afterward, when I was cleaning up the blood, I found something in his bathroom cabinet. She reached into her purse, the expensive leather bag that had been the only thing she'd managed to grab during her escape, and pulled out a small plastic container. Inside were white pills, unmarked and innocuous-looking. Rohypnol, she whispered, and the word hit the room like a physical blow. He had dozens of them, along with detailed notes about dosages and timing. I thought maybe he was experimenting on me, slipping them into my drinks when I got too resistant to his demands. Mom made a strangled sound of horror. Sarah, you mean he was drugging you? That's what I thought at first, Sarah continued, her voice growing steadier as she found her rhythm. But then I found the photographs. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad had gone completely motionless, his soldier's instincts recognizing the approach of something unspeakable. What photographs? I asked, though every cell in my body was screaming that I didn't want to know. Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through what looked like a hidden folder. When she found what she was looking for, she set the phone face down on the table as if she couldn't bear to look at it. Other women, she said simply, unconscious, positioned, arranged, professional quality photos, like he'd done it many times before. There were dozens of them, Emma, dozens of different women. The implications hit me like a freight train. I'd seen enough sexual assault cases to know what Sarah was describing, but hearing it from my sister's mouth made it feel like the floor was dissolving beneath my feet. Jesus Christ, Dad breathed, finally understanding what we were dealing with. I tried to convince myself they were just fantasies, Sarah continued, maybe downloaded from some horrible website. But then I recognized one of the women, Jessica Morris. Do you remember her from high school? She disappeared 3 years ago. The name hit me like ice water. Jessica Morris, the girl who'd been Sarah's lab partner in chemistry, who'd vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a weekend trip to Chicago. The police had investigated for months, but there had been no leads, no evidence, no body. Sarah, I said carefully, Are you telling us you think Michael murdered Jessica Morris? I'm telling you that Jessica Morris is in those photographs, and she's very clearly not acting voluntarily. Sarah's voice was flat now, empty of emotion, the tone of someone who had stared into an abyss and found it staring back. And I'm telling you that after I saw those pictures, I started paying attention to the news differently. She pulled out a manila folder of her own, one that looked like it had been compiled with the obsessive attention to detail of someone whose life depended on being right. Inside were newspaper clippings, printed internet articles, missing person reports spanning back 5 years. 12 women, she said, spreading the articles across the table like tarot cards predicting doom. All between the ages of 22 and 35, all disappeared within a 50-mile radius of where Michael travels for work. And Emma, she looked at me, with eyes that held the weight of terrible knowledge. 3 of them were women you've counseled at the VA center. The room started spinning. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself as the names and faces clicked into place. Linda Rodriguez, who'd been making such progress with her PTSD before she vanished 6 months ago. Amanda Chen, whose husband had died in combat, and who'd been rebuilding her life one day at a time. Maria Santos, the bright young veteran who'd been accepted to nursing school just before she disappeared. He's been hunting them, I whispered, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. He's been using me to find vulnerable women. Sarah nodded grimly. I think he started following you to work, learning about your clients, identifying the ones who were isolated, who wouldn't be missed right away. Female veterans, women with PTSD, women whose families had written them off. Women like me, I finished, the full scope of Michael's plan finally becoming clear. He wasn't just abusing you, Sarah. He was using our relationship to get close to me, to gain access to the most vulnerable women in the city. The silence that followed was different from all the others. This one was charged with horror and the dawning realization that we were dealing with something far worse than domestic violence. We were sitting at a dinner table discussing a serial killer who had been part of our family for 2 years. We have to call the police, Mom said, her voice shaking. Right now. Tonight. I already have, I said, pulling out my own phone and scrolling to a contact labeled Detective Morrison. I've been working with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit since Sarah first showed me those photographs 3 months ago. Sarah stared at me in shock. You didn't tell me, because I needed you safe first, I interrupted, and because I needed to be absolutely certain before I destroyed a man's life. Even a monster deserves due process. I pulled out another document from my seemingly endless supply, a warrant signed by a federal judge, authorizing surveillance and investigation of Michael Harrison in connection with multiple disappearances. They've been building a case, I continued. Phone records, credit card transactions, witness statements. The photographs you found were the final piece they needed to establish pattern and intent. Dad was staring at the warrant with something like awe. Emma, how long have you been working with the FBI? Since I started at the VA center, I admitted. Turns out having a security clearance and a background in crisis intervention makes you valuable to law enforcement. I've been consulting on missing persons cases involving veterans for 3 years. The revelation seemed to hit my family like a physical blow. All this time, while they'd been pitying me for my failed career, I'd been working undercover with federal agents to solve some of the most heinous crimes in the state. But why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice small and confused. Because, I said gently, every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject to Sarah's latest achievement. Because when I mentioned the women I was trying to help, you called them broken and suggested I find a real job helping normal people. The accusation hung in the air between us, impossible to deny. How many dinner conversations had ended with them dismissing my passion as naive idealism? How many times had they made it clear that my work with traumatized veterans was somehow less valuable than Sarah's marketing campaigns? The Foundation, Sarah said suddenly, understanding flooding her face. The Sarah Henderson Foundation. It's not just about domestic violence, is it? I shook my head. It's a front. A way to create a safe house network for women who are being stalked by predators. A place where they can disappear completely while law enforcement builds their cases. I pulled out architectural plans for the building, but these weren't the same cheerful renovation photos I'd shown earlier. These showed safe rooms, panic buttons, surveillance systems, and multiple escape routes. The infrastructure of a fortress designed to protect women from monsters. Maria Santos, I continued, the woman I told you would be our first resident? She's not a domestic violence survivor. She's bait. The words hit the table like a bomb blast. Sarah's face went white. Emma, what are you saying? Maria is an FBI agent, I explained, specially trained in undercover work. She's going to be living in the Foundation, working with me, establishing patterns of movement that will draw Michael out into the open. "You're using yourself as bait too," Dad said, his voice heavy with understanding and fear. "Michael doesn't know that Sarah told me about the photographs," I confirmed. "As far as he's concerned, I'm still the naive social worker who's been inadvertently helping him select victims for 2 years. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, that he can manipulate me just like he manipulated Sarah." I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces, seeing them truly understand for the first time who I really was, what I really did, what I was really capable of. The dinner tonight, the envelope, this whole confrontation, it's all been carefully planned, I admitted. Sarah needed to be free of him before the operation could move forward. She needed to be somewhere safe, with people who would protect her, before we spring the trap. "What trap?" Sarah whispered. I smiled for the first time all evening, and it was not a nice smile. "Tomorrow night, Michael Harrison is going to try to kidnap an FBI agent, and when he does, we're going to be ready for him." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its deep bronze notes marking the transition from revelation to action. I stood at the living room window, watching the empty street through gauze curtains while my family processed everything they'd learned over the past 3 hours. The suburban neighborhood looked peaceful, almost serene, but I knew better than most how much darkness could hide behind well-manicured lawns and cheerful front porches. "I can't believe we never knew," Mom said from behind me, her voice thick with exhaustion and guilt. She'd been crying on and off since the FBI documents came out, the weight of her years of casual cruelty finally sinking in. "All this time, you've been saving lives, and we've been treating you like a failure. You saw what you expected to see," I replied without turning around. "People usually do." Sarah was curled up in Dad's old recliner, wrapped in the Afghan Grandma had crocheted 40 years ago. She looked smaller somehow, as if confessing the truth had physically diminished her, but there was also a lightness in her posture that hadn't been there in months. "Emma," she said quietly, "what happens to me after tomorrow night, after they arrest Michael?" I turned away from the window to face her. "You testify at his trial. Both trials, actually. The domestic violence charges and the federal murder charges. It won't be easy, but you won't be alone. And then? Then you decide who you want to be," I said simply. "The foundation is real, Sarah. The job offer is real. You can spend the rest of your life helping other women escape what you escaped, or you can do something else entirely. The choice is yours." Dad had been quiet for most of the evening, processing everything with the methodical patience of a man who'd seen combat and understood that sometimes the world was more dangerous than civilians wanted to believe. Now he stood up and crossed to where I was standing, his movements deliberate and sure. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, and the words hit me like a physical blow. I should have said it years ago, but I'm saying it now. What you've done, what you're doing, it takes courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age. "Dad, no, let me finish." He placed his hands on my shoulders, and I could see my own eyes reflected in his, the same green-brown hazel that had always made us look more alike than different. "I failed you as a father. I let your mother's expectations and Sarah's achievements blind me to what was right in front of me. You were never the failure in this family, Emma. We were." The apology I'd been waiting 28 years to hear should have felt like vindication, but instead it just felt sad. All those wasted years, all that unnecessary pain, because people couldn't see past their own assumptions long enough to ask the right questions. My phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Morrison. "Asset in position. Operation Greenlight approved for 2100 hours tomorrow. Stay safe, Emma." "It's time," I announced, showing them the message. "Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. this all comes to an end." "What exactly is going to happen?" Mom asked, her voice tight with maternal fear that was 2 decades too late but still genuine. I pulled out a detailed operational plan, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a spy movie rather than a suburban living room. Michael has been watching the foundation building for 2 weeks, ever since Sarah accidentally mentioned it during one of his supervised phone calls. Sarah looked confused. "Supervised phone calls?" "The FBI has been monitoring all his communications since you filed the restraining order," I explained. "Every call, every text, every email. They know he's been planning something. They just needed him to make the first move." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Maria Santos, Agent Santos, would establish a routine of leaving the foundation building alone each night at 9 p.m., walking the same route to the parking garage 2 blocks away. She'd be armed, wired for sound, and surrounded by backup agents. But to Michael she'd look like exactly the kind of vulnerable target he preferred. "He'll follow her," I continued, spreading surveillance photos across the coffee table. "Probably try to incapacitate her in the parking garage where there are fewer witnesses. The moment he makes physical contact, 20 federal agents will move in. "And you'll be there?" Sarah asked. "I'll be in the command center, coordinating with the tactical team." I showed her another document, this one detailing my official role as a federal consultant. "I know Michael better than anyone except you, Sarah. I know how he thinks, how he operates, what he's likely to do when he realizes it's a trap." What I didn't tell them was that I'd also be wearing a wire, that my own apartment was under surveillance, that Michael had been sending me increasingly desperate text messages about Sarah's betrayal and his plans to make her pay. The FBI believed he might try to use me to get to Sarah, and they were prepared for that possibility. "What if something goes wrong?" Mom asked. "What if he hurts you?" For the first time all evening, I smiled with genuine warmth. "Mom, I've been training for this my entire career. Every crisis intervention, every suicide prevention, every time I've talked a traumatized veteran down from violence, it's all been preparation for tomorrow night." I gathered up the documents and plans, returning them to their folders with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "The most important thing now is that you all stay here, stay together, and stay quiet. Michael doesn't know about tonight's conversation, but he's dangerous and desperate. If he contacts any of you..." "We called Detective Morrison immediately," Sarah finished. "Emma, I'm scared." I crossed to the recliner and knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine the way I'd done when we were children, and she'd had nightmares about monsters under her bed. The irony wasn't lost on me that this time, the monster was real. "I know you're scared," I said gently, "but tomorrow night, when this is over, you'll never have to be afraid of Michael Harrison again. And maybe, if we're lucky, 12 other families will finally get answers about what happened to their daughters." The weight of that responsibility settled over the room like a blanket. This wasn't just about Sarah's abuse or my vindication. It was about justice for women whose voices had been silenced forever, whose families had spent years wondering and hoping and grieving. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a final document from my briefcase. "Something I need you all to understand about tomorrow night." The document was a last will and testament, notarized and official, with Sarah listed as the primary beneficiary of my estate. Not because I expected to die, but because in this business, you always planned for the worst-case scenario. "Emma, no," Sarah breathed, understanding immediately what she was looking at. "It's just a precaution," I assured her. "But if something does happen to me, I want you to know that everything I've built, the foundation, the safe houses, the network of support, it all continues. Other people will carry on the work." I stood up and looked around at my family, really seeing them for perhaps the first time in years. They weren't the villains I'd made them out to be in my head, just flawed people who'd gotten caught up in their own dramas and missed the bigger picture. "I love you all," I said simply. "Even when you drove me crazy, even when you broke my heart, I never stopped loving you. Tomorrow night, remember that." As I headed for the door, Sarah's voice stopped me one last time. "Emma, what if he doesn't take the bait? What if Michael is smarter than we think?" I turned back with a smile that was all sharp edges and federal training. "Then we moved to Plan B." "What's Plan B?" "I knock on his front door and arrest him myself." The command center was a converted van parked 3 blocks from the foundation building, filled with monitors, radio equipment, and enough surveillance technology to run a small war. I sat between Detective Morrison and Agent Chen, watching grainy black and white feeds of empty streets and darkened buildings, while my heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. "Target is mobile," Agent Santos's voice crackled through the radio, calm and professional despite the fact that she was deliberately making herself a target for a serial killer. "Leaving the building now, proceeding south on Hamilton Street." On the monitors, I could see her walking with the careful stride of someone trying to appear vulnerable while remaining combat-ready. Maria Santos was 42 years old, a 15-year veteran of the FBI who specialized in undercover work. But in the dim streetlight, she looked exactly like the kind of isolated young woman Michael preferred. "Eagle 1, do you have visual on the target?" Detective Morrison spoke into his radio. "Affirmative. Subject is approximately 50 meters behind the asset, maintaining distance and cover." The voice belonged to Agent Rodriguez, positioned on a rooftop with a sniper rifle and night vision scope. "He's definitely following her." My phone buzzed with a text message, and my blood turned to ice when I saw Michael's name on the screen. "Emma, we need to talk. Your sister has been telling lies about me, and I think you're the only one who can help me set the record straight." I showed the message to Detective Morrison, who immediately signaled to the communications officer. Within seconds, my phone was connected to the surveillance system, ready to record anything Michael might say. "He's making contact," I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. "This wasn't part of the plan." "Answer it," Agent Chen instructed. "Keep him talking as long as possible." I took a deep breath and called Michael back, praying that 3 months of FBI training would be enough to get me through the next few minutes without getting anyone killed. "Michael," I said, injecting just the right note of concern into my voice. "I got your message. What's going on?" "Emma, thank God." His voice was smooth as silk, the same charming tone he'd used to fool my family for 2 years. "I'm so worried about Sarah. She's been acting erratically since she moved in with you, and I think she might be having some kind of breakdown." On the monitors, I could see him walking casually down the street, phone pressed to his ear, seemingly oblivious to the FBI agents tracking his every movement. He was wearing dark clothing and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, but his posture was relaxed, confident. "She did seem upset when she first came to stay with me," I agreed carefully. "But Michael, she showed me some photographs." There was a pause, just long enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve. "What photographs?" "Pictures of her injuries, bruises, cuts." "Michael, did you hurt my sister?" "Emma, you have to understand." His voice took on a pleading quality that made my skin crawl. "Sarah has been under a lot of stress with the wedding planning. Sometimes she gets confused, fabricates things that didn't happen. I would never hurt her. I love her." On the surveillance feed, Agent Santos had reached the parking garage. She was moving slowly now, giving Michael time to close the distance between them, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as she prepared for what was coming. "The thing is, Michael," I continued, watching him on the monitor as he quickened his pace, "Sarah wasn't the only one with photographs. She found pictures of other women too, women who looked unconscious." The silence that followed was electric with menace. When Michael spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the charming fiancé, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You know, Emma, I've always admired your work with those broken veterans. Such dedication to helping people who can't help themselves." The words were casual, conversational, but they carried an unmistakable threat. "It would be a shame if something happened to you before you could finish your important work." "Are you threatening me, Michael?" "I'm just observing that the world can be a dangerous place for women who get involved in things that don't concern them." He was almost at the parking garage now, his movements becoming more predatory as he approached his target. "Maybe you should focus on your own problems, instead of interfering in my relationship with Sarah." Agent Santos disappeared into the parking garage, and Michael followed 30 seconds later. On the tactical radio, I could hear agents positioning themselves at every exit, ready to move the moment Michael made his play. "Michael," I said, my voice carrying just a hint of fear, "where are you right now? You sound like you're walking." "Just taking a little evening stroll," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You know how much I enjoy the nightlife in this city. So many interesting people out and about after dark." The next few seconds stretched like hours. On the radio, Agent Santos was providing a running commentary of her position. "Subject has entered the garage. I'm at my vehicle on level 2. He's approximately 20 meters behind me and closing." "Michael," I said desperately, "I think we should meet somewhere and talk about this like adults. Maybe we can figure out how to help Sarah together." "Oh, Emma," he said, and his voice was soft with mock pity. "Sweet, naive Emma who thinks she can save everyone. Did you really think I didn't know about your little federal friends? Did you honestly believe I was stupid enough to walk into your trap?" My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your Agent Santos is about to have a very bad night." The tactical radio exploded with voices. "He's not here. The garage is empty. Where's the target? All units. We have lost visual on the subject." "Santos, report your position." There was no response from Agent Santos. On the surveillance monitors, the parking garage looked exactly like what it was. An empty concrete tomb with no sign of Michael or the FBI agent who was supposed to be bait. "You see, Emma," Michael's voice continued through my phone, calm and conversational, "I've been watching you just as closely as you've been watching me. Did you really think I didn't notice the extra cars on my street? The agents pretending to be construction workers? The tap on my phone?" Detective Morrison was shouting orders, sending teams to search every inch of the surrounding area, but I knew with sick certainty that they wouldn't find anything. Michael had been playing chess while we'd been playing checkers. "Where is Agent Santos?" I demanded, abandoning any pretense of cooperation. "Safe," Michael replied, "for now. But I'm afraid her safety depends entirely on whether you're willing to make a trade." "What kind of trade?" "You for her, and your sister for both of you." His voice dropped to a whisper that made my spine crawl. "You have 1 hour to bring Sarah to the old warehouse district on River Street. Come alone. No backup, no surveillance, no clever FBI tricks. If I see so much as a single agent, Maria Santos dies, and then I disappear forever, and you'll never find her body." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden silence of the command center. Around me, federal agents were scrambling to implement emergency protocols. but I could see in their faces that they all knew the same thing I did. Michael Harrison had just won the first round. The warehouse district stretched along the river like a cemetery of abandoned dreams, all rusted metal and broken windows under a sky that threatened rain. I sat in my car outside the address Michael had given me, watching Sarah check her service weapon with the methodical precision of someone who had spent the last 3 months learning to fight back. "You don't have to do this," I said for the 10th time in the past hour. "The FBI can find another way." "There is no other way," Sarah interrupted, sliding the magazine back into her Glock with a satisfying click. "Agent Santos is missing because of me, because of photographs I should have turned over to police 2 years ago, instead of hiding them out of shame." The past hour had been a whirlwind of impossible decisions and desperate planning. The FBI wanted to flood the area with agents, but everyone knew that Michael was too smart, too careful, too familiar with law enforcement tactics to be caught by conventional means. The only advantage we had was that he didn't know Sarah had been training for this moment since the night she'd called me from the hospital. "Remember what Agent Chen taught you," I said, checking my own weapon one final time. "Stay calm, stay focused, and trust your training." "I know." Sarah's voice was steady, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of dying, but fear of failing, of letting another woman die, because she hadn't been strong enough to stop a monster when she'd had the chance. We got out of the car and walked toward the warehouse Michael had specified, our footsteps echoing off wet concrete like gunshots. The building loomed before us, 7 stories of industrial decay that had probably been beautiful once, back when this part of the city still believed in the future. "Emma," Sarah said quietly as we approached the main entrance, "there's something I need to tell you before we go in there." "What?" She stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious in the dim streetlight. "The night I found those photographs, the night I finally understood what Michael really was, I almost killed myself rather than face it. The confession hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, I sat in our bathroom with a bottle of pills, ready to swallow all of them rather than admit that perfect Sarah had picked a serial killer for a fiancé. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice never wavered. "Do you know what stopped me?" I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "You did. I remembered that business card you gave me, the one I'd made fun of at Christmas dinner. I remembered you saying that your door was always open, that you'd help anyone who needed it, no questions asked." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I called you instead of taking those pills, and you saved my life without even knowing it. Sarah, I've spent my whole life being jealous of you," she continued. "Jealous of your integrity, your compassion, your ability to see past people's worst moments to their potential for something better. I wanted to be the golden child so badly that I never realized the gold was just cheap paint covering up emptiness." Before I could respond, the warehouse door creaked open, and Michael stepped out into the night like a character from a nightmare. He looked exactly the same as always, handsome, well-dressed, perfectly groomed, but now I could see the predator underneath the polished exterior. "Ladies," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "so good of you to join me. I was beginning to worry you'd decided to trust the FBI instead of caring about Agent Santos's well-being." "Where is she?" I demanded, my hand moving instinctively toward my concealed weapon. "Safe," Michael replied, "for now. But her continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation with my very reasonable requests." He gestured for us to follow him into the warehouse, and I caught Sarah's eye for just a moment. In that brief glance, I saw something that gave me hope. She wasn't the terrified victim who had called me from a hospital bed 3 months ago. She was a warrior who had finally found her cause worth fighting for. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of abandoned machinery and empty shipping containers, lit by a few bare bulbs that cast harsh shadows in every direction. Michael led us deeper into the building, past rusted conveyor belts and massive concrete pillars that had probably supported heavy equipment decades ago. "You know," Michael said conversationally as we walked, "I really did love Sarah at first. She was so beautiful, so eager to please, so desperate for approval. It wasn't until later that I realized she could be useful in other ways." "You mean as a way to get close to my clients?" I said, understanding finally dawning. "Exactly." Michael's voice was bright with genuine enthusiasm, like a teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult concept. "Sarah was so proud of her successful sister, the social worker, always talking about your important work with traumatized veterans. It was almost too easy to suggest that we attend some of your workplace events, meet some of your clients." We reached the center of the warehouse, where Agent Santos was tied to a chair under the harsh glare of a construction light. She was conscious but clearly injured, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. When she saw us, she tried to speak, but duct tape across her mouth prevented anything but muffled sounds. "Maria," I called out, but Michael stepped between us, pulling out a pistol with casual confidence. "Now, Emma, I need you to understand something very important," he said, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining basic facts to a child. "Agent Santos is going to die tonight regardless of what happens between us. The only question is whether she dies quickly and painlessly, or slowly and in considerable agony." "You sick bastard," Sarah snarled, and I could see her own weapon shifting slightly in her concealed holster. "Language, darling," Michael chided. "Remember, we're in the presence of federal law enforcement." He smiled at Agent Santos, who was straining against her bonds with the desperate strength of someone who knew exactly how much danger she was in. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep his attention focused on me while Sarah maneuvered for a better position. "I want you to understand," Michael said, and for the first time all evening, his mask slipped completely. Underneath was something cold and hungry and utterly without human compassion. "I want you to know that every woman I killed because of you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Linda Rodriguez, Amanda Chen, Maria Santos. I learned about all of them from listening to Sarah talk about your work. Every success story you shared at dinner, every breakthrough you celebrated, every life you thought you were saving, you were actually signing death warrants." The warehouse seemed to spin around me as the full scope of what he was saying sank in. Every woman whose disappearance had haunted me, every family whose grief I'd witnessed, every case file that kept me awake at night. I had been the common thread connecting them all to their killer. "You're lying," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew he wasn't. "Am I?" Michael pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Me, laughing at a barbecue, surrounded by female veterans who were celebrating their progress in therapy. "This was taken at your office picnic last summer. How many of these women are still alive, Emma?" I stared at the photograph and felt something break inside my chest. Of the 12 women in the picture, 5 were missing. 5 women who had trusted me, who had shared their stories with me, who had been making progress toward healing, all dead, because I had unknowingly painted targets on their backs. "No," Sarah said firmly, stepping forward despite the gun in Michael's hand. "No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to blame Emma for your choices," Michael laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but I do, Sarah, because your sister has been so very helpful, even if she didn't know it. Every vulnerability she identified, every weakness she helped her clients overcome, every moment of strength she helped them find. I was watching, learning, planning." He gestured around the warehouse with his free hand. "Do you know what this place used to be? A meat processing plant. Very appropriate, don't you think, for what I do here?" That's when I saw them, scattered around the edges of the warehouse, barely visible in the shadows. Bones. Human bones, arranged with the casual indifference of someone for whom murder had become routine. 12 women, Michael continued, following my gaze. "All of them clients of yours, Emma. All of them strong, brave women who thought they had overcome their trauma and were ready to build new lives." Agent Santos made another muffled sound, and I realized she was trying to tell us something. Her eyes were fixed on something behind Michael, and she was nodding urgently despite the tape across her mouth. "But here's the thing," Michael said, raising his gun and pointing it directly at my chest. "I'm getting tired of this game. It's time to end it." That's when Sarah moved. Time fractured into slow-motion fragments as Sarah launched herself at Michael with the fierce desperation of someone who had finally found something worth dying for. Her shoulder caught him in the midsection just as his finger tightened on the trigger, and the gunshot exploded through the warehouse like thunder, echoing off concrete and steel until it sounded like a war zone. I hit the ground hard, rolling behind a concrete pillar as Sarah and Michael crashed into a stack of rusted machinery. Agent Santos was screaming through her gag, the sound raw and urgent, but I couldn't tell if she was warning us about something or just reacting to the violence erupting around her. "Emma, run!" Sarah shouted, her voice strained with pain, but fierce with determination. "Get help!" But I wasn't running anywhere, not this time. Not when everything I'd worked for, everyone I'd tried to save, came down to this moment in an abandoned warehouse with the man who had turned my life's work into his hunting ground. I drew my weapon and moved toward the sound of the struggle, using the industrial debris as cover. Sarah and Michael were locked in a deadly embrace, both fighting for control of his gun while her service weapon had skittered away across the concrete floor. "You stupid bitch," Michael snarled, his charming facade completely gone now. "You should have stayed broken. Should have let me finish what I started." "Go to hell," Sarah gasped, using every technique Agent Chen had taught her to keep the gun pointed away from both of us. That's when I saw what Agent Santos had been trying to tell us. Moving through the shadows at the edge of the warehouse were dark shapes. FBI agents, at least a dozen of them, surrounding the building with military precision. Detective Morrison's voice crackled through a megaphone from somewhere outside. "Michael Harrison, this is the FBI. You're surrounded. Release your hostage and surrender now." Michael's laugh was bitter as broken glass. "Too late," he shouted, and with a surge of strength that caught Sarah off guard, he wrenched the gun free and pointed it at Agent Santos. "One more step and she dies." But Agent Santos wasn't helpless. Even tied to a chair with tape across her mouth, she was still a federal agent with 15 years of experience. As Michael's attention focused on the approaching FBI team, she threw her weight sideways, toppling the chair and rolling away from his line of fire. The distraction lasted exactly 3 seconds. It was enough. I put 2 bullets center mass, just like they'd trained me. Michael Harrison, the charming fiancé who had fooled my family for 2 years, the serial killer who had used my compassion as a weapon against innocent women, dropped to the warehouse floor like a puppet with cut strings. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah was kneeling beside Agent Santos, carefully removing the tape from her mouth, while FBI agents swarmed the building. Detective Morrison appeared at my side, his hand gentle on my shoulder, as he took my weapon for evidence processing. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice professional but kind. I shook my head, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, like everything I thought I knew about myself and my work had been shattered and reassembled into something unfamiliar. "The women," I said quietly. "The bones we saw, are they really—" "The forensics team is already on it," Detective Morrison assured me. "We'll identify them, Emma. All of them. Their families will finally have answers." Agent Santos was sitting up now, accepting medical attention from the paramedics who had followed the tactical team into the warehouse. Her voice was hoarse, but strong when she spoke. "He had a whole setup down in the basement," she reported. "Photographs, trophies, detailed notes about his victims. Everything we need to close at least 15 missing persons cases. 15, not 12. 15 women whose lives had been cut short by a monster who had used my work, my relationships, my family connections to hunt them down like prey." "Emma," Sarah appeared beside me, her clothes torn and dirty but her eyes clear and bright with something I hadn't seen in years, genuine self-respect. "It's over." "Is it?" I asked, looking around at the warehouse that had become a tomb for so many women I'd tried to help. "Sarah, those women died because of me, because I trusted the wrong person, because I didn't see what was right in front of me." "Stop." Sarah's voice was firm, carrying an authority I'd never heard from her before. "Those women died because Michael Harrison was a psychopath who enjoyed killing people. You didn't kill them, Emma. You tried to save them." She gestured toward Agent Santos, who was declining a stretcher and insisting she could walk out under her own power. "And tonight, you did save someone. You saved Maria, you saved me, and you probably saved dozens of women who would have been his future victims." The FBI agents were photographing everything, documenting the crime scene with the methodical precision of people who understood that justice lived in the details. I watched them work and felt something shift inside me. Not healing, exactly, but the beginning of understanding that guilt and responsibility weren't the same thing. "What happens now?" I asked Detective Morrison as we walked toward the warehouse exit. "Now we build the case," he replied. "Your testimony, Sarah's evidence, Agent Santos's experience tonight. It all goes into making sure this never happens again. And the foundation? The Sarah Henderson Foundation opens as scheduled," he said with a smile. "Turns out the city has an even greater need for safe houses than we originally thought." We emerged from the warehouse into the cool night air, where a small crowd of federal agents and local police were coordinating the largest crime scene investigation the city had seen in decades. News vans were already arriving, their bright lights cutting through the darkness like beacons. Sarah found me standing beside one of the FBI vehicles, staring up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's light pollution. She looked different somehow, not just because of the torn clothes and dirt, but because she was carrying herself like someone who had finally found her own strength. "Mom called," she said, holding up her phone. "Apparently the news is already reporting that a federal operation took down a serial killer. She's worried about us." "Are you going to tell her the whole truth?" I asked. Sarah considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "I think I'll start with the fact that her failure daughter just saved my life and caught a killer. The rest can wait until she's processed that." Agent Santos approached us, moving slowly but under her own power. Despite everything she'd been through, she looked remarkably composed, the kind of professional competence that came from years of dangerous work. "Emma," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to thank you before they take me to the hospital for observation." "You don't need to thank me," I replied, shaking her hand. "You were the one taking the real risk tonight." "Maybe," she said with a slight smile. "But you were the one who pulled the trigger when it mattered. That takes a different kind of courage." As the paramedics finally convinced her to accept a ride to the hospital, Detective Morrison returned with a thick folder of preliminary reports. The scope of Michael's crimes was even worse than we'd imagined. Evidence linking him to disappearances in 3 states, spanning nearly a decade. He was methodical, Morrison explained, as we drove back toward the command center. Patient. He'd research his victims for months before making contact, learn their routines, their vulnerabilities, their support systems. "How many women do you think he killed?" Sarah asked from the back seat. "Based on what we found tonight, at least 23, maybe more." Morrison's voice was grim. He kept detailed record, photographs, personal items. "It's going to take months to process everything." The number hit me like a physical blow. 23 women, all of whom had trusted me enough to share their stories, their fears, their hopes for the future. 23 families who would finally get answers, but also 23 graves that could have been prevented if I'd been more observant, more suspicious, more careful about who I allowed into my professional circle. "Emma," Sarah said quietly, reading my thoughts, "you can't carry this guilt forever. It will destroy you." "Maybe it should," I replied, watching the empty streets roll past outside the window. "No." Her voice was firm, final. "Because if it destroys you, then he wins." Michael Harrison spent 2 years trying to break both of us in different ways, and tonight we proved he couldn't. Don't hand him that victory now. 3 hours later, we sat in our childhood kitchen, while Mom made coffee with shaking hands, and Dad paced the floor like a caged animal. The official debriefing would come later, but for now we were just a family trying to process the fact that evil had lived among us for 2 years without anyone recognizing it. "I keep thinking about all the dinners he came to," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the times I served him food, treated him like a son. How could I not have seen?" "Because he was good at hiding," I said simply. "Psychopaths often are. They learn to mimic normal human behavior so well that even professionals get fooled." "But you figured it out," Dad pointed out. "I didn't figure it out," I corrected. "Sarah did. I just helped her find the courage to act on what she knew." Sarah looked up from her coffee cup, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear or insecurity, or the desperate need for approval. She looked like someone who had discovered her own worth. "The foundation," she said suddenly. "When do we start?" "We?" I asked. "You offered me a job," she reminded me. "Director of Operations for the Sarah Henderson Foundation. I want to take it." "Sarah, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She set down her coffee cup with decisive firmness. "Emma, for 25 years I've been trying to be someone I wasn't, chasing some impossible standard of perfection that nearly got me killed. Tonight I finally figured out who I actually am." "Who's that?" She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since we were children. "I'm the woman who helped catch a serial killer. I'm the woman who chose to fight instead of staying a victim. I'm the woman whose sister never gave up on her, even when she'd given up on herself." Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over our suburban neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The house where we'd grown up, where Michael had sat at our dinner table and charmed our parents while planning his next murder, looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, less important than it had seemed when we were trapped by its expectations. "There's something I need to tell you all," I said, pulling out one final document from my briefcase. It was a letter, handwritten on official FBI stationery, with director's letterhead at the top. "What's that?" Mom asked. "A job offer," I replied, showing them the signature at the bottom. "The FBI wants me to head up a new task force focused on crimes against veterans, full federal agent status, based out of Quantico, working cases across the country." The silence that followed was different from all the others we'd shared that night. This one was full of possibility, instead of pain. "That's incredible, Emma," Sarah said. "It's everything you've been working toward." "It would mean leaving Chicago," I pointed out. "Leaving the foundation, leaving all of you." "Or," Sarah said with growing excitement, "it could mean expanding the foundation's reach, taking everything we've learned here, and applying it on a national level." I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them for the first time in years. They weren't perfect, weren't the people I'd needed them to be when I was younger, but they were mine. And maybe, finally, I was theirs too. "There's one condition," I said, folding the letter carefully. "If I take this job, if we expand the foundation, I want you all to be part of it. Not as silent partners or financial contributors, but as active participants in the work." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, we don't know anything about—" "You know about love," I interrupted. "About forgiveness, about second chances, about finding your way back to each other even when you've lost the path. That's exactly what the women we help need to learn. Dad cleared his throat roughly. What would we do? Whatever needs doing, I said simply. Answer phones, stuff envelopes, organize fundraisers, help with childcare for women in transition. The work isn't glamorous, but it matters. Yes, Sarah said immediately. Whatever you need, wherever you need it, I'm in. Me too, Dad said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. It's time I did something useful with my life. Mom nodded through her tears. We owe it to those women, to their families, to you. As the morning sun filled our kitchen with golden light, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a child. The deep, bone-deep satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, with exactly the people I was meant to be with, doing exactly the work I was meant to do. Michael Harrison was dead, but the women he'd killed would be remembered. Their stories would be told, their families would have justice, and their deaths would not be meaningless if they helped us save even one life in the future. So, I said, raising my coffee cup in a toast, to being someone in life, my family echoed. And for the first time in 28 years, I knew exactly who that someone was.